William of Tyre was a medieval prelate and chronicler. As Archbishop of Tyre, he is sometimes known as William II to distinguish him from a predecessor, William of Malines. He grew up in Jerusalem at the height of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, which had been established in 1099 after the First Crusade, and he spent 20 years studying the liberal arts and canon law in the universities of Europe. Following William's return to Jerusalem in 1165, King Amalric made him an ambassador to the Byzantine Empire. William became tutor to the king's son, the future King Baldwin IV, whom William discovered to be a leper. After Amalric's death, William became Chancellor and Archbishop of Tyre, two of the highest offices in the kingdom, and in 1179 William led the Eastern delegation to the Third Council of the Lateran. As he was involved in the dynastic struggle that developed during Baldwin IV's reign, his importance waned when a rival faction gained control of royal affairs. He was passed over for the prestigious Patriarchate of Jerusalem, and died in obscurity, probably in 1186. William wrote an account of the Lateran Council and a history of the Islamic states from the time of Muhammad. Neither work survives. He is famous today as the author of A History of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. William composed his chronicle in excellent Latin for his time, with numerous quotations from classical literature. The chronicle is sometimes given the title Historia Rerum in Partibus Transmarinis Gestarum or Historia Ierosi Limitana, or the Historia for short. It was translated into French soon after his death, and thereafter into numerous other languages. Because it is the only source for the history of 12th-century Jerusalem written by a native, historians have often assumed that William's statements could be taken at face value. However, more recent historians have shown that William's involvement in the kingdom's political disputes resulted in detectable biases in his account. Despite this, he is considered the greatest chronicler of the Crusades, and one of the best authors of the Middle Ages. Early life. The Kingdom of Jerusalem was founded in 1099 at the end of the First Crusade. It was the third of 4 Christian territories to be established by the Crusaders, following the county of Edessa and the Principality of Antioch, and followed by the county of Tripoli. Jerusalem's first 3 rulers, Godfrey of Bouillon, his brother Baldwin I, and their cousin Baldwin II, expanded and secured the kingdom's borders, which encompassed roughly the same territory as modern-day Israel, Palestine, and Lebanon. During the kingdom's early decades, the population was swelled by pilgrims visiting the holiest sites of Christendom. Merchants from the Mediterranean city-states of Italy and France were eager to exploit the rich trade markets of the East. William's family probably originated in either France or Italy, since he was very familiar with both countries. His parents were likely merchants who had settled in the kingdom and were, apparently, well-to-do, although it is unknown whether they participated in the First Crusade or arrived later. William was born in Jerusalem around 1130. He had at least one brother, Ralph, who was one of the city's burgesses, a non-noble leader of the merchant community. Nothing more is known about his family, except that his mother died before 1165. As a child, William was educated in Jerusalem, at the cathedral school in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The scholaster, or schoolmaster, John the Pisan, taught William to read and write, and first introduced him to Latin. From the Historia, it is clear that he also knew French and possibly Italian, but there is not enough evidence to determine whether he learned Greek, Persian, and Arabic, as is sometimes claimed. Around 1145 William went to Europe to continue his education in the schools of France and Italy, especially in those of Paris and Bologna, the two most important intellectual centers of 12th-century Christendom. These schools were not yet the official universities that they would become in the 13th century. But by the end of the 11th century both had numerous schools for the arts and sciences. They were separate from the cathedral schools, and were established by independent professors who were masters of their field of study. Students from all over Europe gathered there to hear lectures from these masters. William studied liberal arts and theology in Paris and Orleans for about 10 years, with professors who had been students of Thierry of Chartres and Gilbert de la Porree. He also spent time studying under Robert of Milan and Adam de Pavot-Pont, among others. In Orleans, one of the preeminent centers of classical studies, he read ancient Roman literature with Hilary of Orleans, and learned mathematics with William of Soissons. For 6 years, he studied theology with Peter Lombard and Maurice de Sully. Afterwards, he studied civil law and canon law in Bologna, with the 4 doctors, Hugo de Porta-Ravenate, Bugarus, Martinus Gosia, and Jacob de Bouragin. William's list of professors gives us almost a who's who of the grammarians, philosophers, theologians, and law teachers of the so-called 12th-century Renaissance, and shows that he was as well educated as any European cleric. His contemporary John of Salisbury had many of the same teachers. Religious and political life in Jerusalem. The highest religious and political offices in Jerusalem were usually held by Europeans who had arrived on pilgrimage or crusade. William was one of the few natives with a European education, and he quickly rose through the ranks. After his return to the Holy Land in 1165, he became canon of the cathedral at Acre. In 1167 he was appointed archdeacon of the Cathedral of Tyre by Frederick de la Roche, Archbishop of Tyre, with the support of King Amalric. Amalric had come to power in 1164 and had made it his goal to conquer Egypt. Egypt had been invaded by King Baldwin I 50 years earlier, and the weak Fatimid Caliphate was forced to pay yearly tribute to Jerusalem. Nur ad-Din had taken control of Damascus in 1154, 6 years after the disastrous siege of Damascus by the Second Crusade in 1148. Jerusalem could now expand only to the southwest, towards Egypt, and in 1153 Ascalon, the last Fatimid outpost in Palestine, fell to the Crusaders. Nur ad-Din, however, also wished to acquire Egypt, and sent his army to hinder Amalric's plans. This was the situation in the east when William returned from Europe. In 1167 Amalric married Maria Komnena, grandniece of Byzantine Emperor Manuel I Komnenos, and in 1168 the king sent William to finalize a treaty for a joint Byzantine crusader campaign against Egypt. The expedition, Amalric's fourth, was the first with support from the Byzantine navy. Amalric, however, did not wait for the fleet to arrive. He managed to capture Damietta, but within a few years he was expelled from Egypt by one of Nur ad-Din's generals, Saladin, who would later become Jerusalem's greatest threat. Meanwhile, William continued his advancement in the kingdom. In 1169 he visited Rome, possibly to answer accusations made against him by Archbishop Frederick, although if so, the charge is unknown. It is also possible that while Frederick was away on a diplomatic mission in Europe, a problem within the diocese forced William to seek the archbishop's assistance. On his return from Rome in 1170 he may have been commissioned by Amalric to write a history of the kingdom. He also became the tutor of Amalric's son and heir, Baldwin IV. When Baldwin was 13 years old, he was playing with some children, who were trying to cause each other pain by scratching each other's arms. The other boys gave evidence of pain by their outcries, wrote William, but Baldwin, although his comrades did not spare him, endured it altogether too patiently, as if he felt nothing. It is impossible to refrain from tears while speaking of this great misfortune. William inspected Baldwin's arms and recognized the possible symptoms of leprosy, which was confirmed as Baldwin grew older. Amalric died in 1174, and Baldwin IV succeeded him as king. Nur ad-Din also died in 1174, and his general Saladin spent the rest of the decade consolidating his hold on both Egypt and Nur ad-Din's possessions in Syria, which allowed him to completely encircle Jerusalem. The subsequent events have often been interpreted as a struggle between two opposing factions, a court party and a noble party. The court party was led by Baldwin's mother, Amalric's first wife Agnes of Courtenay, and her immediate family, as well as recent arrivals from Europe who were inexperienced in the affairs of the kingdom and were in favor of war with Saladin. The noble party was led by Raymond III of Tripoli and the native nobility of the kingdom, who favored peaceful coexistence with the Muslims. This is the interpretation offered by William himself in the Historia, and it was taken as fact by later historians. Peter W. Edbury, however, has more recently argued that William must be considered extremely partisan as he was naturally allied with Raymond, who was responsible for his later advancement in political and religious offices. The accounts of the 13th-century authors who continued the Historia in French must also be considered suspect, as they were allied to Raymond's supporters in the Ibelin family. The general consensus among recent historians is that although there was a dynastic struggle, the division was not between native barons and newcomers from the west, but between the king's maternal and paternal kin. Miles of Plancy briefly held the regency for the underaged Baldwin IV. Miles was assassinated in October 1174, and Raymond III was soon appointed to replace him. Raymond named William Chancellor of Jerusalem, as well as Archdeacon of Nazareth, and on 6 June 1175, William was elected Archbishop of Tyre to replace Frederick de la Roche, who had died in October 1174. William's duties as Chancellor probably did not take up too much of his time. The scribes and officials in the Chancery drafted documents, and it may not have even been necessary for him to be present to sign them. Instead, he focused on his duties as Archbishop. In 1177 he performed the funeral services for William of Montferrat, husband of Baldwin IV's sister Sibylla, when the Patriarch of Jerusalem, Amalric of Nezela, was too sick to attend. In 1179, William was one of the delegates from Jerusalem and the other Crusader states at the Third Lateran Council. Among the others were Heraclius, Archbishop of Caesarea, Josias, Bishop of Acre and William's future successor in Tyre, the bishops of Sebaste, Bethlehem, Tripoli, and Jubala, and the abbot of Mount Sion. Patriarch Amalric and Patriarch of Antioch Amory of Limoges were unable to attend, and William and the other bishops did not have sufficient weight to persuade Pope Alexander III of the need for a new crusade. William was, however, sent by Alexander as an ambassador to Emperor Manuel, and Manuel then sent him on a mission to the Principality of Antioch. William does not mention exactly what happened during these embassies, but he probably discussed the Byzantine alliance with Jerusalem, and Manuel's protectorate over Antioch, where, due to pressure from Rome and Jerusalem, the emperor was forced to give up his attempts to restore a Greek patriarch. William was absent from Jerusalem for 2 years, returning home in 1180. Patriarchal election of 1180. During William's absence a crisis had developed in Jerusalem. King Baldwin had reached the age of majority in 1176 and Raymond III had been removed from the regency. But as a leper Baldwin could have no children and could not be expected to rule much longer. After the death of William of Montferrat in 1177, King Baldwin's widowed sister Sibylla required a new husband. At Easter in 1180, the two factions were divided even further when Raymond and his cousin Bohemond III of Antioch attempted to force Sibylla to marry Baldwin of Ibelin. Raymond and Bohemond were King Baldwin's nearest male relatives in the paternal line, and could have claimed the throne if the king died without an heir or a suitable replacement. Before Raymond and Bohemond arrived, however, Agnes and King Baldwin arranged for Sibylla to be married to a Poitevin newcomer, Guy of Lusignan, whose older brother Amory of Lusignan was already an established figure at court. The dispute affected William, since he had been appointed Chancellor by Raymond and may have fallen out of favour after Raymond was removed from the regency. When Patriarch Amalric died on 6 October 1180, the two most obvious choices for his successor were William and Heraclius of Caesarea. They were fairly evenly matched in background and education, but politically they were allied with opposite parties, as Heraclius was one of Agnes of Courtenay's supporters. It seems that the canons of the Holy Sepulchre were unable to decide, and asked the king for advice. Due to Agnes' influence, Heraclius was elected. There were rumors that Agnes and Heraclius were lovers, but this information comes from the partisan 13th-century continuations of the Historia, and there is no other evidence to substantiate such a claim. William himself says almost nothing about the election and Heraclius' character or his subsequent patriarchate, probably reflecting his disappointment at the outcome. Death. William remained Archbishop of Tyre and Chancellor of the kingdom, but the details of his life at this time are obscure. The 13th-century continuators claim that Heraclius excommunicated William in 1183, but it is unknown why Heraclius would have done this. They also claim that William went to Rome to appeal to the Pope, where Heraclius had him poisoned. According to Peter Edbury and John Rowe, the obscurity of William's life during these years shows that he did not play a large political role, but concentrated on ecclesiastical affairs and the writing of his history. The story of his excommunication, and the unlikely detail that he was poisoned, were probably an invention of the Old French continuators. William remained in the kingdom and continued to write up until 1184, but by then Jerusalem was internally divided by political factions and externally surrounded by the forces of Saladin, and the only subjects that present themselves are the disasters of a sorrowing country and its manifold misfortunes, themes which can serve only to draw forth lamentations and tears. His importance had dwindled with the victory of Agnes and her supporters, and with the accession of Baldwin V, infant son of Sibylla and William of Montferrat. Baldwin was a sickly child and he died the next year. In 1186 he was succeeded by his mother Sibylla and her second husband Guy of Lusignan, ruling jointly. William was probably in failing health by this point. Rudolf Hiestand discovered that the date of William's death was the 29th of September, but the year was not recorded. Whatever the year, there was a new chancellor in May 1185 and a new Archbishop of Tyre by the 21st of October 1186. Hans E. Mayer concluded that William died in 1186, and this is the year generally accepted by scholars. William's foresight about the misfortunes of his country was proven correct less than a year later. Saladin defeated King Guy at the Battle of Hattin in 1187, and went on to capture Jerusalem and almost every other city of the kingdom, except the seat of William's archdiocese, Tyre. News of the fall of Jerusalem shocked Europe and plans were made to send assistance. According to Roger of Wendover, William was present at Gisors in France in 1188 when Henry II of England and Philip II of France agreed to go on crusade. Thereupon the King of the English first took the sign of the cross at the hands of the Archbishop of Reims and William of Tyre, the latter of whom had been entrusted by our Lord the Pope with the office of legate in the affairs of the crusade in the western part of Europe. Roger was however mistaken. He knew that an unnamed Archbishop of Tyre was present, and assumed it must have been the William whose chronicle he possessed, although the Archbishop in question was actually William's successor Josias.